Hello, this is Unsung with GameLeap, and today we're going to be providing you with a tier list for patch 13.17. This patch was supposed to give top a little bit more impact, but it turned out to be a pretty massive buff to bruisers overall. A lot of junglers went from average to substantially above average overnight, and some fringe top lane champions have also received the spotlight. We'll primarily be focusing on the S and S plus tier champions today, but we'll also cover previous S tiers that have dropped down due to nerfs from the patch. Before we begin, make sure to head to GameLeap.com by clicking on the description box below if you want to learn about any of these picks. The GameLeap team and I have spent hundreds of hours tirelessly making a database of the most important mechanics, builds, and tips that no one else can provide. Now onto the tier list, starting with top lane. The golden rule of this patch is Shojin and Iron Spike items are king. If a champion can slot Spear of Shojin, Gore Drinker, or Stridebreaker into their build, they're probably going to be a little bit strong. There are some exceptions to this rule, but most bruisers are straight up overpowered on this patch. Aatrox has received the most amount of work to his kit directly. The shift making his passive and W magic damage from physical has tried to push him away from the Duskblade and penetration builds. This did not work. Aatrox is still capable of building Duskblade Serylda into squishier teams, while Gore Drinker into Cleaver is great into tanks or other bruisers. Aatrox now has a bit more item diversity and actually plays as a decent drain tank. Overall, this change is a net positive, winning us back some build diversity on this champion without making alternative carry focused builds too terrible. Ironically, the champion that relies the most on ability haste is the one that should be building Shojin the least. Abilities that apply hard CC do not gain as much from Spear of Shojin's passive, so Aatrox's Q and W are largely unaffected by this item. Next up is the biggest winner of this patch for top lane, Renekton. Gore Drinker into Spear of Shojin Renekton is by far the highest win rate top laner in the game, with a staggering 59.5% win ratio on 2 items. The next closest item win ratio here is around 55%. You are literally trolling if you do not build these items on Renekton. The numbers speak for themselves. Renekton is without a doubt the strongest blind pickable top laner in the game for a multitude of reasons. Insane gank assist, easy game plan for laning, unmatched teamfight presence are just a few of those reasons. If you want LP this patch as a top laner, pick or ban Renekton every game. Darius is also a huge winner on this patch. The buffs to Stridebreaker HP make Darius an absolute menace out of lane, but he primarily shuts down the other 4 best tops this patch. Renekton, Aatrox, Malphite, and Garen are all food for Darius. So if you don't feel like banning any of these champions out, then I highly recommend that you pick up Darius. Garen is our next pick for S+. This champion is incredibly easy to execute, has an easy to understand, simple game plan, and is one of the best top lane scaling champions in all of League. Garen is an answer for almost every bad matchup due to his incredible synergy with both Phase Rush and Conquer. Enemy team picks something terrifying like Darius sent to you, take Phase Rush and then farm passively, using Phase Rush to run away when you need to. A quick auto QE will grant you your proc and then allow you to split before he can stack. Post Iron Spike Whip, all you need to do is Q, item active, and then E to run away without taking too much damage. After 2 items, no counter pick matters to Garen. Once again, make sure to check out the site by clicking on the description box below to learn all things top lane. And our final S+ pick goes to Tryndamere. Tren received a whopping 50 range buff on this patch with a slight base AD nerf to compensate for the range increase. However, Riot seemed to forget that gaining an extra auto attack from the increased range in a trade has more value than 4 base AD. This change, of course, broke Tryndamere. Kraken is our rush item on this champion. It simply provides too many stats that synergize well with Tren's kit to give up. Our second item slot is where we see the effects of the patch and the Tren buffs. Stridebreaker is actually Tren's highest win rate mythic item by a pretty significant margin. This item is severely underbuilt, and that's probably the only reason that Tryndamere hasn't received a hotfix nerf yet. If you prefer a carry heavy playstyle, then you can play Navori, IE, or Gale Force. But Stridebreaker Tryndamere is insanely broken, and you are actively lowering your chances of winning if you're not playing it. Now that we covered our S+ tier, let's go ahead and talk about honorable mentions. Malphite is a fantastic counterpick into most bruisers. He is really good when it comes to scaling and his teamfight presence. The reason why he's not S+ is because Malphite lacks the traditional carry potential that most of the bruisers actually have. So due to these reasons, Malphite will be placed in S tier. Olaf is also a huge winner of this patch. Olaf is one of the best top laners in the game, but he's very weak against ranged champions. This ranged weakness is the only reason why he doesn't sit in S+. And next up, another big winner on this patch is Fiora. This champion is always solid, but her higher mechanic requirement prevents her from being straight up S tier. Now that we covered our top lane tier list, let's go ahead and talk jungle. Jungle has received some of the more significant changes this patch. A very obvious balance outlier for this patch patch is Jarvan 4. J4 went from being a kind of middle of the pack average-ish jungler to being insanely overpowered the second that the patch shipped. There is basically 2 build paths on this champion that completely break him. If we are against a team that we need to be a little bit more durable into, as in another bruiser or some sort of high damage burst threat, we can go Goredrinker first item. In all other situations, however, we can just rush a Shojin and then J4's win rate spikes from being about 53% to 55%. Shojin Rush is completely bonkers on this champion because of the way that his E and his Q are coded. J4's E is not by itself a CC spell, and neither is his Q. It means that both of these spells double dip on the ability haste buff that Shojin's passive gives. Next up in S+ tier is Hecarim. The reason for this is actually quite surprising. If we go and we look at any stat site, Hecarim actually sits pretty low on the list until we sort by Goredrinker and Stridebreaker win rates. If we go and we select the individual item win rates on both Goredrinker and Stridebreaker, they're at about 55 and 54% respectively, with Stride being the stronger of the two. This means that on Hecarim, if we opt into a more durable bruiser build, we actually gain about 4 to 5% win rate overall. Lethality Hecarim is effectively dead with the changes that he received on this patch. His bonus resistances scaling with his AD is completely gone, and he got more to his base stats. This means that bruiser builds will inherently be stronger, and he's focused more on dealing DPS. So on this champion, we can actually still rush a tier if we're having mana issues, but we want to go directly into Stridebreaker and save our mana for about our 3rd or our 4th even item slot. Stridebreaker into Spear of Shojin Hecarim is by far the 2nd best jungler in the game. Immediately following Hecarim, we have Rek'Sai. Rek'Sai has received a whole bunch of nerfs since her mini rework came through. However, the patch effectively undid a lot of these nerfs because they gave her back tank stats. Stridebreaker Rek'Sai is insanely strong. She doesn't actually like to build Shojin as much because Rek'Sai doesn't need CDR, but because of her heavy reliance on the Stridebreaker active and her heavy reliance on a 1-item spike, she goes back to being the queen of the jungle. Immediately on her heels is Evelynn. This champion was slated to receive a whole slew of nerfs that didn't actually end up going through. Riot should have definitely shipped them. This is by far without a doubt the strongest AP jungler in the game. The only thing that prevents her from being completely dominant is her unique playstyle. But I promise you, if you invest a few games into this champion, no other champ will grant you as much LP in the jungle as Evelynn will. Another big winner on this patch is Nocturne. Stridebreaker Nocturne is completely and utterly broken yet again, and this champion is more than likely going to receive some nerfs because of it. Nocturne is overall just incredibly strong. He is so stat volley, incredibly snowbally, and offers unmatched pick potential, especially in solo queue where games are a little bit more chaotic. This champion went from being, once again, completely average to completely broken overnight. Stridebreaker into Shojin Nocturne is just a complete and utter menace on the Rift right now. Next up, we have Kayn on our list, and no, it is not because Blue Kayn is completely unskilled. As a matter of fact, it's because Red Kayn has received substantial buffs thanks to Spear of Shojin. We can rush Shojin on this champion, or we could rush Goredrinker. The win rates are about the same. Shojin and Goredrinker both offer Red Kayn insane sustain. Goredrinker through the active, and then Shojin through the reduced Q cooldown. This allows for Kayn to turn into a carry substantially earlier on, and then have a more linear scaling instead of being so item reliant. To put it into perspective, the normal Duskblade Kayn has about a 52% win rate, whereas Goredrinker and Shojin Kayn have about a 53.5% win rate. This means that Red Kayn is significantly stronger than Blue Kayn, where Red Kayn is viable. Blue Kayn is also pretty decent, but it's not nearly as strong as Red Kayn this patch, simply due to his reliance on items after all the nerfs. Our honorable mentions on this patch are going to be Vi, Kha'Zix, and Shaco. Vi is incredibly strong with Stridebreaker. The reason for this is you can actually charge your Q, and then as your Q is landing, you can use the Stridebreaker active to get a decaying slow on your opponent and thus get your W off. Vi with Sunderer and Vi with Trinity Force is substantially weaker than Stridebreaker Vi for these reasons. Vi, instead of building Shojin, can also go immediately into a Steric Sage, which turns her into a complete and utter menace with her raw dive potential. This champion gains a disgusting amount of shielding and is nigh unstoppable if we understand how to play her in the early game, which is her only weak period. Next up, our honorable mention for S+ is going to be Kha'Zix. The nerfs actually hit this champion quite hard. His pick rate has suffered as a result, and so has his win rate. This doesn't mean that he's a weak champion at all. It just means that he's not as dominant as the Stridebreaker champions. Most of the Stridebreaker champions have a winning or decent matchup into Kha'Zix, and it definitely shows. And next up on our list is going to be Shaco. Stridebreaker Shaco is back with force. This is completely broken if you understand how to play a more bruiser playstyle. Instead of focusing on one-shotting people, if we play Stridebreaker Shaco and we focus more on getting damage onto the important carries and being an annoying bruiser by going Stridebreaker into Blade of the Ruin King, we can single-handedly shut people down. This is a very strong build, but it does have a differing playstyle, so it's a little bit harder to access. Once we do access this playstyle though, it makes Shaco go from completely useless to decently strong. Now that we covered our junglers, let's go ahead and move to our mid lane tier list. Mid lane has received a substantial amount of changes this patch, most of them geared towards pro play for obvious reasons. Worlds is coming up, Riot wants to move these champions kind of to the forefront of the meta and have a more diverse amount of champions in pro play for us. First and foremost, the biggest winner of this patch is obviously going to be Vex. The Vex buffs are completely broken on this champion. She has really good matchups in the majority of the meta mids. She's pretty good as a blind pick. She has good pick potential in solo queue during the mid game, which most of the traditional mages have a slump. This champion is overall just insanely good on 13.17. Our next S+ pick is going to be Kassadin. There was actually an undocumented change in 13.15 where Kassadin received a 20% AP ratio buff on his ultimate. Kassadin had a full patch of this and Riot didn't actually revert it in 13.17. This has led to Kassadin becoming an absolute menace again. This champion has a lot of damage in the mid game where he previously did not, and this is overall a huge bonus for this champ. Kassadin went from being a complete and utter meme to being incredibly strong in that one stealth change that happened. Next up on our list is going to be Lux. Lux received a Q cooldown buff specifically for the solo lane, and it actually does show. Now Lux is capable of creating picks very easily throughout the course of the game and is incredibly dangerous thanks to her 20-second cooldown ult at around rank 2. This is really funny when you combine it with Ultimate Hunter and you literally just walk around playing Earth where most other champions can't. For this reason, Lux is an S+ tier even though she does have some bad matchups. She is simply just more useful than most champions if we ever have a lead on our team and shuts down objectives single-handedly. Next up on our list is going to be Tryndamere. Tryndamere is completely and utterly broken in the mid lane after the range change as he is in top lane. This is a differing playstyle. Instead of playing to straight up snowball the game, we play to sustain and to get plates against these mages. We generally outsustain their mana pool, and then when they actually do step up to make a misplay, we hit Ghost, we hit Flash, and then we all in our opponent. There is basically nothing that mages can do in a 1v1 vacuum. This has led to Tryndamere becoming an absolutely busted pick in the mid lane, but it does require a little bit more finesse. Next up, as our honorable S tier mention, we have Neeko. Neeko is substantially stronger than most other mage mids, and she has a lot of playmaking potential in solo queue where it matters the most. This champion, however, suffers from bad matchups into Kassadin, Lux, and Vex. So this means that Neeko cannot populate this S+ tier like she should. If Neeko did not have so many bad matchups, this champion would still be a great solo queue carry, but because these champions counter her so hard, we basically do not want to have her in the S+ tier as a blind pick. All the other champions on this list are blind pickable, with the one suffering from the worst matchups being Kassadin, but overbuffed Kassadin doesn't care as long as he's able to hit level 11. Neeko for this reason is not going to be an S+ tier. Another honorable mention is Xerath. Xerath is completely broken thanks to his recent buffs. If you have decent skill shot accuracy, this champion is insanely disgusting for climbing LP. However, if you are not perfectly accurate with your skill shots or you do not have super great aim, then Xerath is simply not going to be as effective, which is why he's not an S+. Overall, mid lane is the role that's affected the least by the bruiser changes. They still do their job as they need to, they're still good for getting picks, and they're still strong carries. Now that we covered mid lane, let's go ahead and move on to bot lane. Most of the bot lane champions in the game are in kind of an awkward spot. Crit itemization is really weak feeling for an AD carry player, and then on-hit is also kind of in that similar state of limbo. Static Shiv has received a number of nerfs, as well as the general nerfs to the items in 13.10. ADC lost about 10% of its power there, according to some Riot sources. So we're kind of starting to see the effects of this. The more stat-bally, utility-heavy AD carries and mages bot lane are once again making a resurgence, as they normally do when crit is bad. This has led to Ashe rising as an S+ pick. Ashe is hands down one of the best AD carries in solo queue due to her pick potential, but now her damage also really shines because other ADCs aren't able to burst her out. Ashe is really weak to burst damage, which is simply not in League of Legends right now, especially with the rise of Shojin and Goredrinker bruisers. The champion that counters these the hardest is going to be Ashe with her targetable slows and with her ultimate, of course. This leads to her being the best marksman on the patch. Next up on this is going to be a little bit surprising, and that is going to be Seraphine. Seraphine bot lane has remained one of the highest win rate champions in League of Legends since her inception, essentially. Seraphine has never had a patch where she's been weak in the bot lane, and it's very obvious as to why. She has unmatched wave clear, her teamfight presence is really strong, her CC is really solid on her E, and her W can single-handedly be one of the most game-changing skills in the game due to the massive AoE heals and shields. We don't actually itemize Seraphine as a support in this role, instead we itemize her as a full damage carry with either Liandry's or Luden's, and she absolutely pumps due to her low Q cooldown. This is very similar to Karthus in the bot lane, but It's more of a utility heavy role that also pumps a lot of damage. Next up for our S plus tier is going to be Misfortune. Misfortune is completely broken with the lowering of crit damage overall. MF has a lot of build diversity. We can go for strike if we want to play a more caster playstyle. If we want to go press the attack and then stat check people out, we can definitely do that. There's definitely a whole bunch of itemization options on Misfortune, and she has a decent matchup into Ashe. We can simply run cleanse, walk directly at her, and then stat check her down, so that way Ashe can't really get off the ground. This champion is just really super solid, especially in lower elo games where people don't respect your range, which is why we're going to have her in S+. And finally, last but not least, we have Karthus. The king of bot lane is simply here to stay. The minor nerfs to Karthus' Q did nothing to push him out of bot lane, and it's very obvious as to why. Who would have guessed that the global ultimate hyperscaling champion would be an absolute menace in the bot lane, where you get the most amount of gold? So for this reason, Karthus remains in S+. Our honorable mentions are going to be Nilah. Nilah is incredibly strong in this meta simply due to the fact that she's able to influence bot lane a lot sooner than most other champions. An XP lead matters a ton for securing dragons, which will then net us wins. Nilah is also very good into the stat checky-ish AD carries, especially the ones that aren't able to burst her out. This champion has been sleeper overpowered for a very long time, even after all the nerfs that she's received, and it's coming back to haunt us now. And now it's finally starting to show through. Xayah is our next honorable mention. Xayah is incredibly strong, but her low range does hold her back. Ashe being meta does inherently counter Xayah, which is why she's not allowed to sit in S tier. Misfortune also has a good matchup into her, and she's able to kind of shut her down with the double up harass. And finally, we have Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa simply has way too much itemization options when compared to most other AD carries. You can go AP, we can go crit, we can go pseudo on hit, you get the idea. AP Kai'Sa scales incredibly hard in the bot lane. Static Shiv is still a decent item on her because Kai'Sa simply has so much mixed damage in her kit, and even if we have a very AP heavy team, we can simply go crit. Crit Kai'Sa actually has one of the higher win rates out of all the crit carries, for obvious reasons. She simply just does too much mixed damage, and she scales incredibly hard with items thanks to her evolution breakpoints. Now that we've covered our AD carries and our mages, let's go ahead and talk about our supports. The support role has received a decent amount of changes with the patch. We have went away from more enchanter heavy supports back towards hook and solo carry supports due to just how volatile solo queue is at the moment. Blitzcrank received a minor rework on the patch that has shifted him from being more of a damage heavy champion into being more of a tank. This makes him really strong during lane where Blitz is traditionally kind of weak. Blitz would lose to DPS after he hooked you. Now because his stats are so high and he gains more effective health due to his mana barrier being changed, Blitz is actually once again a menace in the bot lane, which leads him to be our first S+ pick. Next up is going to be Rell. Rell has been nerfed a pretty decent amount of time since her rework, but her kit is inherently really strong. It would take a substantial change for Rell to fall out of S+, and for this reason, she remains here. Next up on our list is going to be Rakan. Rakan actually requires a lot of effort to get use out of because it's hard to hit the W. People can always flash out of it, people can walk away from it, you get the idea. But once Rakan is able to get out of lane, no other support offers the pure amount of utility solo carry potential that Rakan does. This champion is a menace in teamfights and is always going to be incredibly strong in the right hands. You just have to put work into him. And finally, last but not least, our enchanter pick for S+ is going to be Soraka. When compared to most other enchanters, Soraka is incredibly strong at the moment. Every other enchanter has been nerfed into the ground. They've nerfed Spell Thief's Edge about 3 times, so Soraka is the last one standing. If you want to play an enchanter and you don't mind playing a more utility-based role, then Soraka is definitely going to be the champion for you. Raka will always remain a decent blind pick if you're able to play your life and heal your allies. Now, our honorable mentions for S tier are going to be Maokai, simply due to his super easy to understand game plan. This champion has a point-click W, it's really strong having point-click CC, but what keeps him out of S+ is going to be the pick potential that Blitz has in the mid-game, as well as the 2v2 potential that Rell has. It's really hard to beat Rell as Maokai, and because of this, Mal will sit in S tier. Maokai is simply not as strong as Blitz, Rell, or Rakan. Rakan roams better than Maokai, Rell 2v2 is better than Maokai, and Blitz gets picks in the mid-game a lot easier. While the champion is quite easy to execute, the point-click CC that he has access to isn't enough to push him into S+. Amumu is another great solo queue pick. This champion is just incredibly strong during the lane phase and offers for some really good 2v2s. However, Rell kind of does it better, Blitzcrank is a little bit safer to play, and Rakan once again has better roaming in teamfight potential. And our last honorable mention here is going to be Xerath. Xerath went from being a really strong support with his rework to being kind of mediocre after Riot has nerfed him. Once again, Spell Thieves has received a lot of early game nerfs. If you're not able to walk up to your opponent and get your passive off, Xerath does suffer from mana issues, but if you're allowed to get to that one item spike, Xerath turns into an absolute menace on the Rift. This champion is completely broken when it comes to dealing damage and getting picks in the mid game. Xerath at one item hits the point where if he lands a Q on an AD carry and then he walks out of vision, uses his ulti and lands 3 out of 4 shots, they more than likely end up dying, especially if we're running the first strike page. This champion is really strong in the right hands, but once again does have a heavy skill shot reliance. Once again, this was Unsung with GameLeap. Thank you all for watching, and make sure that you click on the description box below so you can get access to hundreds of hours of curated content made by professional coaches such as myself. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video.